Welcome now. Before we start, I ask you to subscribe. Tell us where you're from and don't forget to leave a like. The GPS lost signal 30 minutes ago, but I kept driving through the endless curtain of snow anyway. My Airstream Classic, a silver bullet against the white darkness, pushed forward on the narrow mountain road of Vermont. Christmas lights twinkled in the distance, a welcome sight after hours of nothing but pine trees and darkness. I should have known better than to trust those lights. The village appeared like a Christmas card come to life. Perfect wooden cabins with smoke rising from their chimneys, colorful lights strung between lampposts, and a massive Christmas tree in what seemed to be the town square. No cars on the streets, but fresh tracks in the snow suggested recent activity. My camera itched in its bag. This was exactly the kind of scenic winter wonderland I'd been looking for. The RV park sign caught my eye. Holly Night Campground. Free Christmas stay. Perfect timing, I thought, as the temperature gauge on my dashboard showed a concerning drop. The snow was getting heavier, and the idea of a proper campground instead of another night of wild parking was too tempting to resist. I followed the candy cane-striped markers down a winding path. I pulled into the empty campground, the only sound being the crunch of snow under my tires. Every camping spot had its own little Christmas tree, decorated with twinkling lights that seemed to run on some hidden power source. The camp office, a cozy log cabin, had a welcome travelers sign hanging crooked on its door. A single electric lantern cast a warm glow through its frozen windows. The registration desk was empty, but a handwritten note welcomed me. Choose any spot. Christmas is a time for giving. Please join us for caroling at midnight. The office walls were covered with photographs of happy campers from previous years, all posed in front of their RVs. Something felt off about those photos, but I couldn't quite place what. Maybe it was the way everyone had the exact same smile. As I walked back to my RV, the Christmas lights throughout the campground flickered simultaneously. In that brief moment of darkness, I heard it. The sound of bells, not like cheerful sleigh bells, but deep, resonant ones that seemed to come from somewhere beneath the snow. And then I saw them. Dozens of fresh footprints in the snow around my RV, all leading toward it. Though I'd only been gone for 5 minutes, they hadn't been there when I went to the office. Setting up camp went smoothly. Too smoothly. Every hookup was perfectly maintained despite the heavy snow, and the power connection worked flawlessly. Outside, the Christmas lights cast colorful shadows that danced across the snow, creating patterns that seemed to shift and change. Even when the lights remained steady, I tried to capture them with my camera, but every photo came out strangely blurred. The carol singers were getting closer. I could hear their voices carried on the wind. But something was wrong with the melody. The words weren't quite right, ancient-sounding phrases mixed with familiar Christmas tunes. Through my RV's windows, I caught glimpses of movement between the trees, dark shapes moving in perfectly synchronized patterns, their footsteps leaving no prints in the fresh snow. My phone had no signal, but the RV's radio picked up a single station. Christmas music played continuously, interrupted by static-filled messages I couldn't quite make out. The announcer's voice sounded distorted, as if speaking through layers of time. Between songs, I swore I could hear someone whispering my name. Though I hadn't told anyone at the campground what it was, the temperature inside the RV kept dropping, despite the heater running at full blast. Frost patterns formed on the inside of the windows, creating intricate designs that looked like faces in agony. I tried to wipe them away, but they reformed instantly. The faces seemingly staring at me with increasingly detailed features. My breath came out in thick clouds, and the metal walls of the Airstream began to creak and groan. A knock at the door made me jump. Outside, a small gift box sat on my steps, wrapped in shimmering paper that seemed to move on its own. No footprints led to or from it. The tag read simply, "For our special guest, open at midnight." Through the windows, I could see more boxes appearing around my RV, all wrapped in the same shifting paper, all with the same tag. The carolers were almost here now, their voices clearer but still wrong. Through the frosted windows, I could make out their shapes. tall, impossibly tall figures wearing what looked like traditional Christmas attire, but their movements were jerky and unnatural. As they drew closer, I realized with growing horror that the sounds of their singing weren't coming from their mouths, but from somewhere deep underground. The digital clock on my RV's dashboard blinked 11:59, though I was certain it had shown 10:30. Just moments ago, the gift boxes outside had multiplied, forming a perfect circle around my airstream, each one pulsed with a faint, reddish glow that grew stronger as midnight approached. The carol singers had stopped moving, forming their own circle beyond the gifts, their faces hidden in shadows despite the Christmas lights all around. My hands shook as I watched the clock tick over to midnight. The temperature plummeted so suddenly that the windows cracked, geometric patterns spreading across the glass like spider webs. Outside, the gifts began to vibrate, their wrapping paper rippling as if something inside was trying to get out. The carolers raised their arms in perfect unison, their songs becoming deeper, more guttural. The first gift exploded open, releasing a cloud of shimmering fog that moved against the wind. Seeping through the cracks in my RV's windows, the fog carried the scent of pine needles and something else, something old and musty, like long-buried secrets. More boxes burst open, their contents swirling together into a thick mist that began to take shape. Through the frosted windows, I watched in horror as the mist formed into figures, translucent forms that looked like children opening presents. But their movements were wrong, playing out the same actions over and over like a skipping record. Each figure held something in their hands that glowed with an intense red light, similar to the lights that had led me to this cursed campground. The carolers began moving closer, their circle tightening around my RV. In the Christmas lights, I could finally see their faces, or rather, their lack of faces. Where features should have been, they had only smooth blank surfaces with faint indentations where eyes should be. Their clothes, what I had thought were traditional Christmas outfits, were actually made of wrapped gift paper that rustled and shifted as they moved. A final gift, larger than the others, appeared directly in front of my RV's door. Unlike the others, this one unwrapped itself, the paper falling away to reveal a large mirror. In its reflection, I saw myself, but not as I was now. Instead, I saw myself as one of them, wrapped in shifting paper, faceless, holding a gift out to some unseen future visitor, and behind my reflection, visible only in the mirror, stood a massive figure in a red suit, its empty black eyes fixed directly on me. My RV's engine roared to life without me touching the keys, the dashboard lighting up with impossible readings. Every gauge spun wildly, and the GPS screen showed coordinates that kept changing. Though I knew we weren't moving, the radio crackled to life, playing what sounded like backward Christmas carols interspersed with children's laughter. The faceless carolers pressed their hands against my RV's windows, leaving behind glowing handprints that began to burn through the metal. The temperature inside dropped so low that my breath froze in front of my face, forming tiny crystals that sparkled with the same sickly light as the gifts. Through the walls, I could hear them whispering my name in voices that sounded like rustling wrapping paper. Movement caught my eye. The mirror was changing, its surface rippling like liquid mercury. My reflection continued to move independently, unwrapping presents that didn't exist in the real world. With each gift opened, a new faceless figure appeared behind me in the mirror, until an entire crowd watched my reflection's actions with their blank, indented faces. The large figure in red moved closer in the mirror, its movements jerky and wrong, like a marionette controlled by unseen strings. In its hands, it held a gift wrapped in paper that seemed to be made of shadows. My reflection reached for it eagerly, but I could see what my mirror self couldn't. The writhing shapes trying to break free from within the package. A deep chime sounded from somewhere beneath the campground, and the carolers began a new song, one that made my ears bleed and my vision blur. The lyrics spoke of an ancient exchange, a Christmas tradition older than Christmas itself, where gifts were given and souls were taken. Through the pain, I realized with horror that I wasn't their first visitor. All those photos in the office, Those happy campers with identical smiles, they were showing me my future. The mirror's surface began to crack, but instead of breaking, it created a doorway. My reflection stepped halfway through, holding out its hand to me, its face now smooth and blank like the others. Behind it, the figure in red nodded slowly, raising its gift like an offering. The caroler's song reached a fever pitch, and I felt an irresistible urge to reach out, to accept what was being offered, to become part of this eternal Christmas exchange. Chapter 5. The unwrapping time seemed to freeze as I fought against the pull of the mirror. My reflection's outstretched hand began to materialize in the real world, emerging from the glass like a photograph developing in reverse. The caroler's song had become a physical force, pressing against me from all sides, trying to push me toward my waiting doppelganger. The walls of my RV began to peel away like wrapping paper, revealing glimpses of other realities behind them. In one, I saw previous Christmas Eves in this same spot, different travelers in different RAVs, all facing the same choice I now faced. In another, I saw what looked like an endless warehouse filled with wrapped gifts, each one containing something that used to be human. My reflection had stepped completely through now, its paper-wrapped form standing in my RV, where its feet touched the floor. The metal transformed into more wrapping paper, spreading like an infection. The figure in red remained in the mirror, but its presence felt stronger, more real with each passing moment. The gift in its hands pulsed with a heartbeat that matched my own. The photos from the office began appearing on my walls, hundreds of them materializing out of nowhere. But now I could see the truth. The identical smiles were masks, literally pasted onto the faces of the people in the images. Behind each smile, I could make out expressions of pure terror frozen in time. Some of the photos were moving, the trapped souls behind the masks silently screaming. A new sound cut through the caroler's song, sleigh bells but wrong, like they were being wrung underwater. The figure in red began to emerge from the mirror, bringing with it an overwhelming smell of peppermint and decay. Its suit wasn't red from dye, I realized with horror, but from something far more organic. Fresh stains appeared with each movement. My reflection grabbed my arm with impossible strength, its paper skin crinkling with the motion where it touched me. My own skin began to transform, becoming thin and wrappable. The figure in red was almost fully through the mirror now, and in its true form, I saw what had been leaving those deep bell sounds beneath the snow. A massive instrument made of bones, each one labeled with the name of a previous visitor. The transformation had reached my chest when the Christmas tree outside suddenly burst into flames, its lights exploding in a shower of sparks. The fire spread impossibly fast, igniting the paper-wrapped carolers one by one. Their song turned to screams that sounded almost grateful in the chaos. My reflection's grip loosened just enough. I threw myself toward the RV's door, my partially transformed skin tearing like paper where my doppelganger held on. The figure in red lunged forward, its suit splitting open to reveal the writhing mass of gift wrap and ribbons that made up its true form. The gift it held burst apart, releasing a swarm of what looked like Christmas ornaments with teeth. The burning carolers began to melt, their paper forms revealing the ancient machinery beneath. Clockwork constructs that had once been human, forced to perform this ritual year after year. The snow around us turned to steam, exposing the vast network of tunnels beneath the campground, each one lined with wrapped packages that pulsed with fading heartbeats. My RV's engine roared again, and this time I felt the vehicle respond to my desperate need to escape. I slammed it into reverse, tearing free from the hookups that I now saw weren't power cables at all, but tendrils of the creature's vast form. The mirror shattered as I pulled away, but through each broken piece, I could see different versions of myself being dragged into that eternal Christmas nightmare. The last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was the figure in red standing in the center of the burning campground, slowly rewrapping itself as the fires died down. The other me, the one that had almost succeeded in taking my place, dissolved into a pile of torn paper that was quickly gathered up by the wind. The Christmas lights along the road blinked out one by one as I fled. I drove until dawn, not stopping until I reached the nearest town. The police didn't believe my story. Of course, they said there was no campground where I described, just an old abandoned lot that had been empty for decades. But every Christmas Eve since then, I get a card in the mail. It's always wrapped in paper that moves on its own, and inside is a photo of me, smiling that perfect, identical smile, standing in front of my RV in a campground that doesn't exist. The most recent card came with a note, "Your gift is still waiting." If you're ever driving through Vermont during Christmas and see those twinkling lights in the distance, promising a free stay at a cozy campground, keep driving. Those Christmas lights aren't meant to welcome you. They're meant to wrap you up and add you to their eternal collection. The Arctic Fox ARV's heater struggled against the 40-degree temperature as I followed the mysterious lights in the sky. This far north, the sun had set weeks ago, leaving only the endless polar night. My military training screamed that driving off-road in these conditions was suicide. But those lights, they weren't like any aurora boreal I'd photographed before. They seemed to pulse with purpose, like they were beckoning me forward. My GPS had stopped working hours ago, the screen showing only strange symbols that looked like ancient runes. The radio picked up nothing but static, occasionally broken by what sounded like children singing Christmas carols in a language I'd never heard before. The song seemed to sync with the rhythm of those impossible lights above, creating a hypnotic pattern that made it hard to focus on the snow-covered road ahead. The thermometer kept dropping, even though we'd already hit temperatures that shouldn't be possible this close to civilization. My military-grade winter gear felt paper-thin against the cold, and frost patterns began forming inside the RV's windows. They looked like elaborate Christmas decorations, but there was something wrong about their symmetry. They formed perfect fractals that seemed to extend infinitely inward. Through the swirling snow, I spotted what looked like Christmas lights strung between the trees. They formed a path leading deeper into the forest, their colors matching the strange aurora above. The rational part of my mind knew there shouldn't be any decorations this far from civilization, but after 3 days of darkness, any sign of human presence felt irresistible. The clearing appeared suddenly, a perfect circle of cabins arranged around a central Christmas tree that stretched impossibly high into the dark sky. Each cabin was decorated with elaborate light displays that moved in ways lights shouldn't, creating patterns that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. The snow in the clearing was pristine, except for tiny footprints that seemed to appear and disappear as I watched, standing in front of my RV. Camera ready to capture the aurora, I realized the singing had stopped. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of multiple doors creaking open simultaneously. From each cabin emerged small figures holding candles, children dressed in ancient-looking Christmas attire, their faces hidden by elaborate masks that seemed to shift and change in the flickering light. They began to sing again, but this time I understood the words, and I wished I hadn't. The children's song spoke of an ancient ritual, a Christmas tradition that predated Christianity itself. They sang of lights that came down from the sky during the longest night of the year, bringing gifts that no moral being should receive. Their voices carried an impossible harmony, creating overtones that made my teeth vibrate and my vision blur. My ARV's systems began failing one by one. First the heater, then the lights, and finally the engine itself. The cold crept in rapidly, but it wasn't natural. This cold had purpose, had weight, had consciousness. The frost patterns on my windows were moving now, forming images of past Christmases that never were, showing celebrations that took place before humans walked the earth. The massive Christmas tree in the center of the clearing began to glow from within, its lights pulsing in sync with both the aurora above and the children's song. The ornaments weren't glass or plastic. They were translucent spheres containing what looked like miniature worlds, each one showing a different version of this same clearing throughout time. In some, I saw other RVs, other travelers who had followed the lights. The children formed a circle around my vehicle, their candles now burning with flames that cast no light, but instead seemed to drink in the darkness. Their masks had become more fluid, revealing glimpses of what lay beneath, faces that belonged to no earthly children. Through my frosted windows, I watched as they began a slow dance, their movements too precise, too angular to be human. The aurora descended lower, its lights now weaving between the trees like luminous serpents. Where they touched the snow, they left behind traces of metallic symbols that matched the ones on my GPS screen. The children's song reached a fever pitch, and I realized with horror that they weren't singing about the lights coming down from the sky. They were calling them down. As the first tendril of light touched my Ives roof, the entire vehicle shuddered. The metal walls began to resonate with the same frequency as the children's song, and through the vibrations, I felt more than heard words in a language older than time. The gift bringer comes, the exchange must continue. As it was before Christmas, as it will be after. The being that emerged from the aurora bore little resemblance to any Christmas figure I'd ever seen. It wore red, yes, but the color seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its form was massive, stretching up into the auroral curtains above. And what I had thought were sacks of presents were actually composed of writhing darkness that moved with purpose. The children's masks had fully melted away now, revealing faces that were beautiful in their geometric perfection. Too perfect. Like fractals given flesh, they held up their hands in welcome. And I watched in horror as their fingers elongated into crystalline structures that caught and refracted the aurora's light in impossible ways. Their song had become deeper, resonating with frequencies that made my bones ache. My camera started taking pictures on its own, the flash firing rapidly. But when I checked the display, each image showed a different time period. In one, the clearing was filled with ancient stone circles. In another, futuristic structures pulsed with the same light that now filled the sky. Every image showed the same figure in red, though its form changed through the ages, always bringing gifts, always demanding exchange. The temperature inside my Arv had dropped so low that the air itself was crystallizing, forming patterns that matched the children's faces. Through the geometric frost, I watched as the figure approached my vehicle, its movement suggesting joints and angles that violated physical law. In one hand, it held what looked like a present wrapped in aurora light. In the other, an ancient ledger bound in materials I couldn't comprehend. The ledger opened itself, pages turning on their own to reveal names written in light. Thousands of them, dating back to times before written language existed. I recognized some of the more recent ones from missing persons reports I'd read while researching this area. Each name was followed by a series of symbols that seemed to move on the page, describing what had been exchanged. My Arv's radio crackled to life one final time, but instead of Christmas carols, it played back voices from previous exchanges. People accepting gifts, their words becoming increasingly distorted as they made their trades. The most recent recording was from just last year. The voice speaking in a language that sounded like English played backwards through breaking glass. The children's crystalline fingers began tapping against my Arv's windows, each touch leaving behind fractal patterns that spread across the glass like living things. The rhythm of their tapping matched perfectly with their impossible song, creating a harmonics that made reality itself seem to vibrate. Through the spreading patterns, I watched as previous visitors stepped out of the miniature worlds contained in the Christmas tree's ornaments. The figure in red had reached my door now, its form shifting between different cultural interpretations of gift givers through the ages. Sometimes it wore a bishop's mitre, sometimes a crown of holly and ice, sometimes things that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. The present it held pulsed with auroral light, showing me glimpses of everything I'd ever wanted. Perfect photos of the lights, recognition, understanding of the universe's mysteries. My military training screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The clearing had become a sphere of light, with us at its center. The snow beneath my rave had turned transparent, revealing layer upon layer of previous clearings, previous exchanges, stretching down into the depths of time. In each layer, I could see the remains of vehicles and offerings left behind by those who had come before. The ledger floated before my window now, a pen made of pure light hovering beside it. Each symbol on its pages seemed to contain entire universes of meaning. and I realized with growing horror that I could read them perfectly. They described trades that reshaped reality itself, gifts of knowledge and power that came with costs too terrible to comprehend. The blank space below the last entry pulsed invitingly. The children's song reached its crescendo, their crystalline forms now fully revealed. They weren't children at all, but something that had existed since the first gifts were exchanged. Since the first offerings were made to powers beyond human understanding, their fractal faces showed infinite reflections of previous ceremonies, each one a window into moments when others had faced this same choice. The figure in red extended its gift toward my window, and the glass simply ceased to exist. The auroral light pouring from the package showed me everything I could become, everything I could understand if I just signed my name. If I just accepted this one gift on this longest night. Behind me, my camera continued to flash, each picture capturing a different version of what might happen next. The pen moved on its own, drawing me toward the ledger as the figure's gift pulsed with increasing intensity. Each pulse revealed another layer of reality. Dimensions folded upon dimensions, all centered on this eternal moment of exchange. The children's crystalline forms had begun to merge with the aurora, their song becoming the voice of the lights themselves. My camera's memory card ejected itself, floating in the frozen air. The images it contained were moving now, showing not just different times, but different possibilities. I saw myself signing the ledger in countless ways, each signature leading to a different fate. Some showed me transformed into one of the crystalline singers. Others showed me becoming part of the aurora itself. In every image, the figure in red stood watching, its form becoming clearer with each flash. The gift began to unwrap itself, aurora light peeling away like living ribbon. Inside was everything and nothing, a void that contained all knowledge, all power, all possibility. But in its depths, I saw the truth. Every gift given required something in return, and these exchanges had been happening since before Earth existed. The figure wasn't bringing presents. It was collecting payments on an ancient debt. The ledger's pages turned to entries from the beginning of time, showing the first exchange, when humanity traded its connection to the universe for the illusion of control. Each subsequent entry was another payment on that original debt. And with growing horror, I realized that the children weren't here to celebrate. They were here to serve as eternal witnesses to a contract that could never be fulfilled. My Arv's metal frame began to sing in harmony with the crystalline choir, its structure transforming into something that bridged dimensions. Through the dissolving walls, I could see other vehicles from other times, all brought here by lights in the sky, all faced with the same choice. The figure in red stood motionless, patient, eternal. It had all the time in the universe to wait for my decision. The pen touched the ledger's surface, and reality held its breath. In that moment, I saw what my signature would mean, not just for me, but for everyone who would come after. The gift wasn't meant for me at all. It was meant for everything that I would become, everything I would influence, every future exchange I would witness through transformed eyes. The children's song reached impossible frequencies, and the aurora began its final descent. The decision came with the clarity of survival instinct. The same instinct that had saved me in combat zones. Instead of reaching for the pen, I grabbed my camera and pointed it directly at the figure's true face. The flash punctured the aurora's curtain, and in that burst of light, I saw what had been hiding behind centuries of Christmas traditions. The children's crystalline forms shattered like struck glass, their song collapsing into frequencies that tore at the fabric of reality. The figure in red recoiled, its form losing coherence as my camera captured truth after truth. Each flash revealed another layer of deception. The gifts that were really chains, the exchanges that were really thefts, the ancient debt that was really a trap. My RV's engine roared to life, powered by something beyond electricity. The metal frame, still singing with dimensional harmonics, began to resonate with the frequency of escape. Through the viewfinder of my still-firing camera, I saw the figure's true nature recorded in frames of light. A collector of souls, a keeper of contracts, a being that had twisted the joy of giving into an eternal harvest. The Christmas tree's ornaments exploded, releasing centuries of trapped moments. Time itself began to unwind in the clearing, as previous exchanges broke free from their crystal prisons. The ledger burned with aurora fire, its pages releasing names back into the universe. Above, the lights in the sky started to show their true colors. Not the dancing curtains of charged particles, but the bars of an ancient cage. I drove through dimensions my tires, leaving tracks in realities that should never have touched. Behind me, the figure's form dissolved into what it had always been. A hole in the universe shaped like our desires, draped in red to hide its hunger. The children's remains rang like broken bells in my wake, their song transforming into a warning that would echo through time. Now I watch the northern lights from safe distances, my camera always ready. The pictures from that night developed strangely, each one showing a different truth about what lurks behind winter's longest shadows, sometimes on clear nights near Christmas. I pick up radio signals that sound like crystalline singing. The songs are different now, no longer calling others to exchange, but warning them to stay away if you're ever driving north of Fairbanks in December, and you see lights in the sky that seem to beckon you forward. Turn back. Some Christmas traditions are older than time. The welcome to Pine Haven, where Christmas lives forever sign, should have been my first warning. My Keystone Montana's headlights illuminated the faded paint, revealing scratch marks that looked suspiciously like desperate fingernails had carved them. Snow fell in perfect geometric patterns, each flake catching the light in ways that seemed deliberate. Orchestrated, I'd chosen this town for my documentary because of its unique approach to Christmas. They celebrated it year-round, but December was special, according to local legend. Pine Haven hadn't missed a Christmas celebration in 122 years. Tourist blogs mentioned how the town's holiday lights never went out. Even during power outages, what they didn't mention was the strange humming that seemed to emanate from every decorated house. The Arv Park was nestled between rows of perfectly trimmed pine trees, each one decorated with identical ornaments that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. The elderly manager, Mrs. Winters, hadn't looked up once while checking me in, her hands mechanically stamping forms with movements that were too precise, too rhythmic. Her smile never reached her eyes, which remained fixed on a point just above my head. I'd set up my documentary equipment before sunset. 3 main cameras, wireless mics, and my personal favorite, a thermal imaging camera for night shots. The footage from the thermal camera was already showing something odd. The Christmas lights appeared to be drawing heat from their surroundings rather than generating it. The temperature around each strand of lights was significantly lower than it should have been. The town's famous Christmas music played continuously from hidden speakers, but something was wrong with the familiar tunes hidden beneath the cheerful melodies. I could hear discordant undertones that made my teeth ache when I tried to record the music. My equipment picked up what sounded like whispered pleas buried in the background static. As night fell, I noticed that none of the RV park's other residents ever left their vehicles. Through their windows, I could see them sitting perfectly still, staring at their Christmas trees with fixed smiles. The ornaments on their trees seemed to rotate on their own, and sometimes just at the edge of my vision. I thought I saw the decorations pulse in sync with the occupants' breathing. Sleep came fitfully that first night, interrupted by the constant carol music that seemed to grow louder after midnight. The thermal camera's live feed showed something impossible, heat signatures moving between the RVs, but nothing visible to the naked eye. Each signature was shaped like a person wearing what appeared to be a Santa hat, but their movements were wrong, like puppets being pulled by strings from above. Morning brought no relief from the Christmas atmosphere. Every surface in Pine Haven was decorated, but looking closely at the ornaments revealed disturbing details. What I'd initially thought were traditional baubles actually contained tiny scenes, like snow globes in reverse. Inside each one, miniature figures performed holiday rituals endlessly, their faces frozen in expressions of desperate joy. The locals moved through their daily routines with mechanical precision, each one wearing Christmas-themed clothing that looked decades old but somehow pristine. When they spoke, their conversations seemed scripted, limited to discussions of holiday preparations and celebrations. Any attempt to steer the conversation elsewhere was met with blank stares and an immediate return to festive topics. My cameras kept malfunctioning in specific ways. The footage would play back normally until it captured certain decorations or residents, at which point the image would distort into patterns of Christmas trees and stars. The audio was worse. Every recording contained layers of voices singing carols in languages that linguistic software couldn't identify. Mrs. Winters appeared at my RV door that afternoon, still wearing the same fixed smile. She carried a plate of Christmas cookies that seemed to twitch occasionally and insisted I take them. "Everyone must participate," she said, her voice harmonizing unnaturally with the background carols. "The celebration requires it. It's feeding time." The cookies sat on my counter, and I swore I could hear them singing faintly. Through my camera's viewfinder, I saw something moving beneath their frosted surfaces, tiny hands pressing upward, trying to break through the sugary coating. The plate they sat on had started to frost over, patterns of Christmas trees spreading across its surface like a growing infection. The sun should have set hours ago, but an unnatural twilight persisted over Pine Haven. The Christmas lights had grown brighter, pulsing in complex patterns that made my vision blur when I tried to focus on them. My thermal camera revealed the truth. The lights weren't electric at all. They were conduits, channeling something from above the town into every decorated surface. I'd started noticing the empties, residents who moved through their routines without any signs of actual life. Their skin had a waxy sheen, and in certain lights I could see straight through them to the Christmas decorations they wore internally. Some had ornaments hanging from their ribs, tinsel wrapped around their organs, all visible through flesh that had become as transparent as glass. The documentary footage was revealing more than I'd intended when played frame by frame. You could see the moment each resident was decorated, their bodies opening like advent calendars to receive their internal Christmas trimmings. The thermal camera showed these transformations in horrifying detail, heat signatures dying out as holiday cheer was forcibly installed. My RV's windows had begun to frost over with impossible patterns, scenes from Christmases past, present, and what looked like future. In them, I watched Pine Haven's history unfold. The town hadn't always been like this. Something had arrived 122 years ago, something that had turned their normal holiday celebration into an eternal ritual, feeding a presence that lurked above the town's perpetual twilight. The carols had changed as night approached. The hidden voices in the static were clearer now, singing about the great decorator and its hunger for celebration. They sang of how it had found this town, how it had reshaped it into a perfect Christmas display, and how it required constant feeding through joy and decoration. The songs were a warning wrapped in fake cheer. Mrs. Winters returned with more residents, all wearing those horrifying smiles. Through my cameras, I could see that their bodies were just containers now, wrapped packages holding something that pulsed with festive light. They surrounded my ROV, pressing ornaments and lights against its walls. "It's time for you to join our celebration," they sang in perfect harmony. "The great decorator requires new displays." My RV's systems began to fail as the decoration spread across its surface. The metal walls softened and became transparent like the residents, revealing Christmas lights that were installing themselves in the vehicle's internal structure through the transforming walls. I watched in horror as more empties emerged from their RVs, their bodies glowing with internal Christmas lights. The ground beneath my RV had become transparent, revealing a vast network of tunnels that resembled subway lines on a transit map. But instead of trains, these tunnels carried streams of Christmas spirit, literal rivers of joy and celebration being pumped up from some source deep below the town. The thermal camera showed these streams as absolute zero. Sucking heat from everything they touched, Mrs. Winters led the gathered residents in a carol I'd never heard before, its lyrics describing the transformation process in cheerful, terrifying detail. They sang of how the great decorator had chosen Pine Haven, how it reshaped human bodies into perfect Christmas displays, and how the town served as its eternal feeding ground. Between verses, I could hear the screams of past victims buried in the melody. My documentary equipment captured everything. Even as it was being transformed, the cameras grew crystalline appendages that resembled Christmas tree branches, their lenses multiplying like ornaments. The footage they recorded showed multiple layers of reality: the surface celebration, the horror beneath, and something vast and hungry that loomed above the town's perpetual twilight. The residents began a synchronized dance, their movements causing the decorations they wore internally to chime and sparkle. With each step, the transparent parts of their bodies revealed more of the workshop that existed below the town, a massive factory where new decorations were grown in vats of liquid cheer, fed by the captured joy of tourists and visitors. Through my RV's transforming walls, I watched as new residents were being prepared in the workshop below. Fresh arrivals were dipped in tanks of liquid Christmas spirit, their bodies becoming transparent as decorations were installed. The process was designed to be eternal. Each decorated body would eventually burn out, requiring constant replacements to maintain the celebration. The entity above Pine Haven finally revealed itself as my RV's transformation neared completion. It descended through the perpetual twilight like an inverted Christmas tree, its branches made of frozen joy and its ornaments crafted from captured souls. Each branch terminated in a needle that could inject holiday cheer directly into human flesh, turning people into living decorations. My cameras, now fully crystallized, recorded the truth about Pine Haven's eternal celebration. The town wasn't just celebrating Christmas, it was farming it, extracting genuine joy and wonder from visitors to feed something that had discovered our holiday traditions and found them delicious. The residents weren't celebrating, they were processing human emotions into food. Mrs. Winters approached my RAV one final time, her transparent body showing how thoroughly she'd been decorated internally. Through her glass-like flesh, I could see how the Christmas lights had replaced her nervous system, how ornaments hung from her ribcage, and how tinsel had been woven through her organs. She smiled that horrible smile and began to explain my role in the eternal celebration. The great decorator had chosen Pine Haven for its feast, but it needed documentation. My cameras, my equipment, my skills. They would be repurposed to create endless Christmas cards and holiday videos. Luring new visitors to the town, each piece of footage would be infused with compulsion, drawing people to Pine Haven like moths to decorative lights. Through the workshop below, I watched as my documentary footage was already being processed. Scenes of horror transformed into cheerful holiday moments that would be shared across social media. The residents' bodies acted as living filters, their transparent flesh processing images through layers of forced festivity until only the celebration remained visible. The great decorator's branches reached for my RV, ready to begin my transformation into its newest record keeper through my crystallizing equipment. I could see the future it had planned. Endless years of documenting Pine Haven's celebration, my body becoming a living camera preserved in holiday cheer, forced to capture the feeding process for eternity. The thermal camera saved me in the end. Its footage of the absolute zero Christmas spirit coursing through the town's tunnels created a feedback loop in the transformation process. As the great decorator tried to reshape my equipment, the true images of its feeding process began broadcasting through every decorated surface in Pine Haven, including the residents' transparent bodies. The eternal celebration faltered as reality crept back into the town. The residents' bodies began to reject their decorations. Internal Christmas lights flickering and dying as genuine human consciousness fought its way back. Through my cameras, I watched as the workshop below imploded, its vats of liquid cheer crystallizing and shattering. I drove my partially transformed drive through the town's entrance sign, shattering the boundary that had kept Pine Haven in eternal twilight. Behind me, the great decorator thrashed in agony as its food source rejected it, its branches of frozen joy melting in the real winter air. The documented truth had broken its hold, at least temporarily. The footage I escaped with tells the real story of Pine Haven, though watching it requires strong filters to prevent the compulsion from taking hold. In thermal imaging, you can see the great decorator still hovering above the town, waiting for memories to fade and celebration to resume. The residents have forgotten everything, their minds protected by walls of enforced cheer. My Arv never fully recovered. Sometimes the walls still turn transparent, revealing Christmas lights that pulse in sync with my heartbeat. The cameras record moments from future celebrations, showing other towns where something vast and hungry has discovered the joy of human holidays and decided to feast. Now I travel the country, leaving warnings at Arv parks and campgrounds. If you're driving through Colorado in December and see signs for Pine Haven, keep driving. If you hear Christmas carols in perfect harmony, cover your ears. And if you meet anyone with a perfect Christmas smile and skin that seems too clear, run. Some celebrations never end, and some decorations consume more than just electricity. The North Star Lodge appeared through the snowstorm like a mirage, its windows glowing with warm light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the Christmas music drifting through the air. My Jayco Redhawk struggled up the final stretch of road, its wheels fighting against fresh snow that seemed to grab at them like hungry hands. The GPS had died hours ago, showing only an error message. No stars visible for navigation. The parking lot was surprisingly full for such a remote location. Other RVs and vehicles arranged in a perfect circle around a massive Christmas tree that seemed to touch the low-hanging clouds. Each vehicle was covered in a layer of snow that sparkled too brightly in my headlights, creating patterns that looked almost like faces when viewed from the corner of my eye. The lodge's front desk clerk, an elderly man named Mr. Frost, seemed unsurprised by my late arrival. "We've been expecting you," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "You're just in time for the gift exchange. Everyone must participate. It's tradition." His ancient ledger showed my reservation, though I distinctly remembered making it for next week. As I settled into my RV for the night, the lodge itself was mysteriously full. I noticed something odd about the other vehicles in the lot. Each one had a small present placed on its dashboard, wrapped in shimmering paper that seemed to move on its own. Through my windows, I could see their occupants sitting perfectly still, staring at their gifts with expressions of desperate anticipation. The Christmas tree at the center of the parking lot cast shadows that didn't match its branches, creating dark patterns in the snow that looked like reaching hands. My research into the lodge's history had mentioned its unusual gift-giving tradition, but nothing about why several guests had disappeared over the years, always on Christmas Eve, always after the midnight exchange at exactly 11:45 p.m. The lodge's ancient speakers crackled to life, playing what sounded like a children's choir, singing in the language that made my teeth ache. As the music grew louder, I watched in horror as perfect, identical tears began rolling down the faces of every person visible through their vehicle windows, their smiles growing wider with each drop. The gift exchange would begin at midnight, Mr. Frost had explained, his voice carrying undertones that made my recording equipment malfunction. Each guest was required to place a wrapped present beneath the central tree. The night visitor, as he called it, as he would ensure everyone received exactly what they most desired, even if they didn't know they desired it yet. My cameras were set up to document the tradition, but the footage showed impossible things. In infrared, the Christmas tree appeared to be breathing, its branches moving like tentacles when no one was looking directly at it. The presents already placed beneath it pulsed with heat signatures that matched human heartbeats, each one perfectly synchronized with its giver's vital signs. The other guests moved in perfect unison as midnight approached, emerging from their vehicles like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. Each carried a wrapped gift that seemed to whisper when they walked past my RV. Through my zoom lens, I could see that their eyes had become reflective, like animals' eyes in the dark, but the reflections showed scenes from Christmas past that never happened. The temperature dropped rapidly as the hour approached. frost patterns forming on my windows that spelled out messages in ancient languages. My research notes about the lodge's history began changing before my eyes, the ink rearranging itself to tell a different story, one about an entity that had learned to prey on human desires by mimicking gift-giving traditions. At 11:59, the Christmas music stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep thrumming that seemed to come from beneath the earth. The snow around the tree began to recede, revealing patterns carved into the asphalt of the parking lot, concentric circles filled with symbols that matched the ones that had appeared in my notes. The lodge's front door opened, and Mr. Frost emerged wearing what looked like a traditional Santa suit. But the red wasn't from dye, and the white trim moved on its own like living frost. In his hands, he carried a large book that appeared to be bound in material that still held warmth. "The ledger must be balanced," he announced, his voice harmonizing with the thrumming from below. "All exchanges are final." The entity that emerged from between the tree's branches didn't so much appear as unfold, its form a twisted parody of holiday cheer. It wore red, yes, but the color shifted and flowed like fresh blood. Its beard was composed of tiny, squirming shapes that might have been mistaken for Christmas lights if they didn't occasionally blink. When it moved, it left footprints in the snow that immediately filled with something dark and viscous. My cameras captured everything, though reviewing the footage later would reveal different events playing out simultaneously. In one version, the being appeared as each person's perfect idea of Santa Claus. In another, it was something ancient that had existed long before humans invented gift-giving, wearing our traditions like an ill-fitting suit. The gift exchange began with mechanical precision. One by one, guests approached the tree, their movements becoming more fluid and inhuman with each step. They placed their offerings before the entity, each package somehow containing the physical manifestation of something they were willing to trade. Memories, years of life, fragments of soul wrapped in shimmering paper and tied with ribbons of regret. In return, the being presented each person with a package that pulsed with unholy light. Through my zoom lens, I watched as they opened their gifts with trembling hands. Each box contained exactly what they'd always wanted, but twisted somehow. Perfect love that would consume them entirely. Success that would hollow them out. Dreams that would trap them in eternal sleep. Mr. Frost stood beside the entity, recording each exchange in his living ledger. The book's pages turned by themselves, revealing endless lists of trades made throughout history. Some names I recognized from missing persons reports throughout the years. Others appeared to be written in languages that predated human civilization. The night air filled with the sound of tearing paper and gasps of joy that quickly turned to something else. Each recipient clutched their gift like it was the most precious thing in existence, even as the items began to change them. Through my camera's viewfinder, I watched as subtle alterations spread across their features. Desires made flesh, wishes granted with monkey's paw precision. My turn was approaching. The being's attention turned to my RV, its eyes reflecting every Christmas I'd ever experienced, including ones that hadn't happened yet. The gift I was meant to offer sat on my dashboard, though I hadn't placed it there. The paper it was wrapped in showed scenes from my life, moments where I'd wished for something so desperately that I would have traded anything to get it. The other guests had begun to change more dramatically. Those who had wished for eternal youth were becoming something young, but not quite human. Those who had asked for love found themselves melting together like candle wax. Success seekers grew sharp edges and hollow centers, becoming perfect corporate shapes with nothing inside. Mr. Frost's ledger had reached my page, the ink still wet and writing itself. It listed everything I'd ever wanted. Categorized by what I'd be willing to trade for each desire, the entity's gift for me already sat beneath the tree, wrapped in paper that showed possible futures, each one perfect in ways that would destroy who I was. Through my cameras, I watched as the previous exchanges began to take full effect. The lodge's parking lot was transforming into a museum of granted wishes. Each vehicle contained a diorama of desire's ultimate conclusion. Perfect moments frozen in time, experienced eternally by beings that had once been human, but were now something else entirely. The entity approached my Arv, leaving footprints of liquid time in the snow. In its wake, reality rippled like heat waves, showing glimpses of other Christmases, other exchanges, other versions of this same moment playing out across history. The being's gift-giving was older than Christmas, older than winter itself, a cosmic force that had learned to use human traditions as a hunting blind. My cameras captured the true nature of the exchange, not gifts given freely, but a metaphysical transaction where human essence was traded for desires made manifest. Each perfectly granted wish created a change in reality that the entity fed upon, growing stronger with each exchange. Time began to stutter as midnight stretched impossibly long. Through my windshield, I watched as Mr. Frost's true form began to show through his human disguise. His ledger had grown to impossible size, its pages containing every gift ever given, every wish ever granted, every price ever paid. His Santa suit cracked like ice, revealing a form composed entirely of frozen moments and crystallized desires. The other guests were reaching the final stages of their transformations. Those who had wished for fame now glowed with internal light, their forms becoming living advertisements for their own perfect lives. Knowledge seekers had sprouted extra features, eyes, ears, and other sensory organs that could perceive truths no human was meant to understand. The parking lot had become a gallery of monkey's paw consequences. My gift continued to write itself, the paper rippling as it added new layers of wrapping, each one showing a different version of what I could become. The entity waited patiently, its form shifting between different cultural interpretations of gift givers throughout history. Behind it, the Christmas tree had begun to unravel, its branches reaching toward the sky like a massive antenna, broadcasting human desire into the void. Mr. Frost's ledger had reached the final page, a massive accounting of all reality, showing how each granted wish shifted the balance of existence. The being wasn't just granting desires, it was using them to reshape reality itself, turning human longing into a force that could bend the laws of physics. Each perfect gift was a crack in the universe's foundation. Through my cameras, I watched as time began to fold around the lodge. Previous Christmas Eves layered over each other like transparent sheets, showing how the entity had refined its technique over centuries. What had started as simple trades, food for good hunting, warmth for worship, had evolved into this complex exchange of human essence for perfectly granted desires. As the entity's gift for me pulsed beneath the tree, I saw what it truly offered. Not just the fulfillment of my wishes, but a place in its endless exchange. My cameras would document every trade, my words would draw new seekers, and my essence would become part of the ritual itself. Another gear in the cosmic machinery of desire. The choice came with brutal clarity, the same choice every human faces when offered exactly what they want most. My cameras had captured the truth about desire, how it shapes us, changes us, transforms us into beings willing to trade everything we are for everything we think we want. The footage showed what happens when those trades are actually accepted. I started my RV's engine at exactly midnight, the sound breaking the ritual's rhythm. The entity's form flickered, showing its true nature. Not a gift giver, but a cosmic accountant, balancing books that contained the weight of all human longing. Mr. Frost's ledger began to burn with cold fire as the premises collapsed. The transformed guests turned to watch my departure, their new forms already beginning to fade. Some reached out with appendages that had once been arms, trying to share the wisdom their perfect gifts had granted them. Through my rearview mirror, I watched as their desires consumed them completely, leaving behind only perfectly wrapped packages containing everything they'd been willing to trade. The footage from my cameras documented everything: the entity's true form, the cosmic ledger's contents, the price of perfectly granted wishes. But the most important images showed the moment of choice, when a human soul decides whether their desires are worth the cost of becoming something else entirely. Now I travel between REV parks and campgrounds, leaving warnings about the North Star Lodge. The entity still operates, though it changes location each year. My cameras sometimes turn on by themselves, showing Christmas celebrations where the gifts are too perfect and the joy too complete. The footage catches moments when human desire opens doors that should stay closed. If you're driving through Montana in December and see signs for the North Star Lodge, keep going. If someone offers you exactly what you want most, remember that desire has teeth and perfect gifts have perfect prices. Some exchanges can't be undone, and some wishes should remain ungratified. The smell hit me first. Gingerbread and mulled wine mixing with something else, something older and metallic. My Thor motor coach's external cameras caught the first glimpse of Frosthaven's famous Christmas market through the swirling snow. The wooden stalls seemed to pulse with internal light, their decorations moving subtly when no one was looking directly at them. The market manager, Mrs. Kringle, greeted me with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "You must try everything," she insisted, her smile fixed and glassy. "The market feeds everyone, and everyone must feed the market." She handed me a map marked with red stars. Mandatory tastings, she called them. The paper felt warm and slightly damp, like something freshly butchered. My cooking channel's subscribers had been begging me to visit this place, famous for its unique take on traditional Christmas treats. Each comment mentioned different specialties. Gingerbread, that supposedly showed you visions of your future. Mulled wine that made you hear ancient carols. Sausages with special ingredients that no one could quite identify. The comment section was filled with 5-star reviews from accounts that only posted once and never again. Setting up my filming equipment at the first stall, I noticed something odd about the other food bloggers and critics in the market. They moved from stall to stall methodically, sampling everything with mechanical precision. Their reactions seemed rehearsed, their reviews all using the same phrases: life-changing, unforgettable, you'll never want to leave. Through my camera's viewfinder, I could see that none of them cast reflections in the market's many mirrors. The gingerbread maker's hands moved too quickly as she worked, her fingers bending at impossible angles. The dough she shaped seemed to breathe, and through my zoom lens, I caught glimpses of patterns in the spices that looked like tiny screaming faces. When she offered me a sample, I swore I heard the cookie whimper. As night fell, more customers arrived, but no one left. The market's lights grew brighter, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. The Christmas music playing from hidden speakers began to change, the familiar carols shifting into something older, something that made my recording equipment emit sounds like a hungry stomach growling. Mrs. Kringle reappeared just as I was setting up my night shots, her clipboard now covered in symbols that seemed to squirm across the page. "It's time for the special menu," she announced, her voice harmonizing unnaturally with the market's background music. "Everyone must eat. The market must be fed. It's tradition." The food stalls had changed as darkness fell. The cheerful Christmas decorations now looked more like warnings, and the menu boards displayed prices in something other than money. The mulled wine stand offered memories of summer in exchange for a cup, while the sausage vendor's price list included moments of joy and first kisses as acceptable payment. My cameras captured the transformation of the other food critics. Each bite they took seemed to drain something from them: color, substance, humanity. Through my viewfinder, I could see how hollow they were becoming, their bodies just containers for all they had consumed, yet they kept eating, their reviews becoming more ecstatic as they faded away. The gingerbread woman's stall had evolved into something ancient and terrible. Her cookies now openly screamed when broken, each one containing a perfectly preserved moment of someone's life. The patterns in her spices had become more complex. Forming recipes that predated written language, her movements were completely inhuman now, her form suggesting something vast, folded into a human shape. The market's central feast table appeared at midnight, laden with dishes that defied description. Each plate contained something that looked traditional at first glance, but revealed its true nature when viewed through my camera. The roast beef was marbled with memories, the puddings bubbled with distilled joy, and the special punch was garnished with crystallized time. Mrs. Kringle stood at the head of the table, her clipboard now clearly showing what the market required: a balanced diet of human experience, consumed and converted into energy to keep something ancient fed through the long winter nights. Each dish had to be tasted, each experience consumed, or the hunger would spread beyond the market's boundaries. In my Av's kitchen, I reviewed the footage while my own cooking equipment came alive with sympathy. Pots bubbled without heat, utensils rearranged themselves into unsettling patterns, and my spice rack began organizing itself according to some alien periodic table of human emotion. The market's influence was spreading, turning every cooking implement into a tool for something other than physical nourishment. The recipe book Mrs. Kringle had given me started writing itself, each page filling with instructions for dishes that should never be prepared. The ingredients lists called for components like the sound of children's laughter and the warmth of first love, with cooking times measured in memories rather than minutes. The marginalia showed the true purpose of each dish, not to feed humans, but to feed something that fed on humans. Through my windows, I watched the market's true nature reveal itself. Each stall was a mouth in a vast digestive system, breaking down human experiences into something the entity could absorb. The critics and food bloggers had become part of the process, their endless consumption and reviews creating a self-sustaining cycle of feeding and being fed. My professional kitchen knives began to dance in their magnetic strip, cutting shapes in the air that matched the patterns in the gingerbread spices. Each blade had acquired a new purpose, designed to slice away specific human experiences with surgical precision. The cutting board wept real tears when I touched it, and the oven whispered recipes that would cook more than mere food. The market's cookbook contained the truth about Frosthaven's survival. The town wasn't just hosting a Christmas market, it was feeding something that had found humanity's winter festivities to be the perfect hunting ground. Each traditional dish had been modified over generations to extract maximum emotional nutrition from its consumers. As midnight approached again, my RV's kitchen transformed into a satellite of the market's greater purpose. The refrigerator now contained shelves of bottled emotions. The freezer preserved moments in time, and the pantry stored dried memories that would never fade. Every tool and ingredient had become part of an endless feast where humanity was both the chef and the main course. The market's true feeding time began at the darkest hour of the night. My cameras captured the process in horrible detail, each stall opening like a flower made of teeth, the vendors revealing their roles as digestive enzymes in a vast supernatural stomach. The Christmas lights pulsed in rhythm with the entity's hunger, and the snow falling around the market had become a membrane separating this feeding ground from the normal world. Mrs. Kringle presided over the feast, her clipboard now clearly showing the nutritional values of different human experiences. Joy was high in essential energy, while sorrow provided necessary minerals. Love was the most valued nutrient, but it had to be extracted carefully to maintain its potency. The other food critics had become living utensils, processing new experiences for the market's consumption. The gingerbread woman's true form emerged as she prepared her special midnight batch. Her dough was made from compressed human moments, each cookie containing a complete life experience that would be digested by the market's supernatural metabolism. Through my zoom lens, I watched as she folded time itself into her recipes, creating treats that would feed the entity through multiple dimensions. My professional expertise revealed the horrifying efficiency of the market's design. Each traditional dish had been perfectly modified to extract maximum emotional nutrition from its consumers. The mulled wine dissolved the barriers between past and present, allowing the entity to feed on memories that hadn't happened yet. The sausages contained essences that made customers hungry for experiences they'd never want to digest. The feast table had become an altar where the line between consuming and being consumed disappeared. Each dish served was both food and feeding, transforming dinner into a ceremony where human essences were refined into something the entity could absorb. The critics ate endlessly, their reviews becoming more rapturous as they were broken down into their component experiences. Through my cameras, I documented how the market maintained its perfect balance. Each consumed experience had to be replaced, each digested memory compensated for. The entity fed on the exchange as much as the experiences themselves. growing stronger with each transaction between what was human and what merely wore humanity like an ill-fitting chef's coat. Mrs. Kringle's clipboard showed the final calculations as the feast reached its peak. The market required a perfect balance of consumed experiences to maintain its disguise until Christmas. Each dish carefully calibrated to extract maximum nutrition without completely draining its consumers. But something had gone wrong with the recipes, and the entity's hunger was growing stronger than the market could contain. The other food critics had begun to break down completely, their bodies dissolving into pure experience that the market could absorb directly. Through my viewfinder, I watched as they became ingredients in a larger recipe, their lifetimes of consuming and reviewing food making them perfect fodder for something that fed on consumption itself. My Arv's kitchen had fully transformed into an organ of the market's digestive system. The appliances pulsed with dark purpose, and the spice rack contained bottled essences of every human experience imaginable. The recipe book continued writing itself, revealing the true history of how an ancient hunger had learned to disguise itself as tradition. The temperature dropped as the entity's true form began to emerge from between the market stalls. It wore the shape of every winter feast celebration humanity had ever created. Its body a composite of all the ways we disguise consumption as celebration. Through my cameras, I saw how it had spread from market to market through history, growing stronger with each new tradition. It corrupted. Mrs. Kringle's human disguise began to fade as she made the final preparations. Her clipboard contained calculations older than mathematics, showing how many human experiences were needed to keep the entity fed through the winter. The market's Christmas decorations revealed their true purpose, not to celebrate, but to mark the boundaries of a feeding ground. The feast table groaned with impossible dishes, every Christmas dinner that had ever been or would be, distilled into perfect nutrient sources for something that ate the act of eating itself. The entity's hunger had grown too strong for the market's traditional containment, and soon it would need more than just the experiences of willing consumers. The market's collapse began with a single broken recipe. One of the food critics, not quite fully dissolved, remembered what food was supposed to be. Sustenance, not sacrifice. The memory spread through the feast like a contamination, reminding every dish of its original purpose. The entity's perfect digestive system began to break down. I used my professional knowledge to accelerate the collapse, identifying the key ingredients that held the market's illusion together. Each traditional dish contained a core of genuine celebration that the entity couldn't fully corrupt. When exposed, these memories of real feasts acted like antibodies, attacking the supernatural parasites that had infected each recipe. The footage from my cameras became a cookbook for survival, documenting how to recognize when celebration becomes consumption. The market's true recipes revealed themselves in reverse. Not how to prepare food that fed the entity, but how to recognize when tradition has been corrupted by hunger that can never be satisfied. Mrs. Kringle's clipboard burst into flames that froze rather than burned, releasing all the calculations and contracts back into the universe. The critics who hadn't been fully digested began to reform, though they would never taste food the same way again. The market stalls collapsed one by one, each one releasing the experiences it had stored for the entity's consumption. I drive between winter markets now, my Arv's kitchen equipped to detect when celebration turns to consumption. The entity still exists, moving from feast to feast, but my cameras can reveal its presence. The footage shows how to recognize the signs, when traditional dishes ask for more than ingredients, when recipes require experiences instead of spices, when the feast becomes more about feeding something else than sharing food. The Christmas market in Frost Haven is closed now, though sometimes people report hearing carols that make them unreasonably hungry. My final recordings show how close we came to feeding something that would never stop eating, and how thin the line is between celebration and sacrifice. Some traditions are actually appetizers, and some feasts are traps. If you find a Christmas market that never closes, where the food critics never leave, and the traditional dishes taste like pure emotion, keep walking. Some celebrations are actually ceremonies. The Welcome to Evergreen Falls sign was almost completely covered by unnaturally green pine branches. My Winnebago Vista's sensors registered an impossibly high concentration of oxygen in the air, and the GPS kept recalculating, as if the roads were somehow shifting. Something about the trees lining Main Street seemed off. They were too perfect, too symmetrical, and they all seemed to lean slightly toward passing cars. The local tree farm was my first stop. My research grant focused on studying the unique characteristics of their Christmas trees, which reportedly stayed fresh for months without water. The owner, Mr. Green, had an unsettling smile as he led me through rows of identical trees. "They're very special," he kept saying. "They choose their families, not the other way around." Setting up my testing equipment, I noticed something strange about the soil around the trees. It was too rich, too dark, and when I took samples, they seemed to move in the collection tubes through my microscope. I saw structures that shouldn't exist in normal pine trees, complex networks of fibers that pulsed like nervous systems. More disturbing was how the samples reacted to human presence, reaching out toward body heat. The town's Christmas tree lot was already busy, though it was early in the season. Families walked between the rows of trees, but something about their behavior was odd. They moved dreamlike, touching the needles with reverent expressions. Some had been there for hours, swaying slightly as the branches brushed against them. None of them responded when I tried to ask questions. My scientific instruments began malfunctioning in specific ways. The spectrometer showed impossible chlorophyll readings, and the DNA sequencer displayed patterns that looked more like ancient symbols than genetic code. When I tried to photograph the trees' unusual growth patterns, my camera's screen showed something moving beneath their bark as dusk approached. I heard it, a low humming coming from the trees, almost like singing. The customers still in the lot began harmonizing with it, their voices taking on tones that human throats shouldn't be able to produce. Through my night vision camera, I watched as the trees' branches moved in patterns that looked eerily like sign language. The first sign something was truly wrong came from my soil samples. Under the microscope, the dark earth was transforming, the complex networks becoming more organized. What I'd initially thought were root systems were actually more like synapses, forming connections that reminded me of neural networks. More disturbing was how they responded to stimulus. Not like plants, but like something far more conscious. Mr. Green's office walls were covered with photographs showing the town's history with the trees. In the oldest images, dating back to 1872, I noticed something unsettling. The trees appeared in the backgrounds of every photo, but their positions changed from image to image as if they had moved when no one was looking. In some photos, the branches seemed to be reaching for unsuspecting residents. My RV's parking spot at the tree farm began to feel less like a research station and more like a trap. The surrounding trees had definitely moved closer since morning, their branches now close enough to scratch against the windows. Through my instruments, I detected something like electrical signals passing between them, forming a communication network that encircled my vehicle. The town's records, stored in a small museum, told a strange story. Every family in Evergreen Falls had a Christmas tree, kept alive year-round. Those who tried to remove or burn their trees invariably left town shortly after. Though no one seemed to remember exactly where they went, the records showed no deaths in the town for the past 150 years, only transitions marked with strange symbols. My botanical analysis revealed something impossible. The trees weren't individual organisms, but rather extensions of something much larger. The root systems connected to a central network that seemed to predate the town's founding. More alarming were the growth rings visible in core samples. They showed patterns that suggested consciousness, with complex symbols formed in the wood itself. As night fell again, the humming from the trees grew stronger. Through my equipment, I detected massive surges of neural-like activity flowing through the root systems. The trees were sharing information, and somehow I knew they were sharing information about me. In the darkness, their branches swayed without wind, reaching toward my RV with deliberate purpose. The truth about Evergreen Falls emerged from my data like a pattern coming into focus. The trees weren't a unique species of pine. They were something else entirely. something that had learned to mimic pine trees just as it had learned to mimic Christmas traditions. The neural networks in the soil were part of a vast, ancient intelligence that used human celebration as camouflage. Mr. Green's behavior became more erratic as my research progressed. His movements were too smooth, too plant-like, and tiny branches had begun growing from beneath his fingernails. Through my microscope, I saw the same neural networks that ran through the soil now running through his veins. He wasn't tending the trees, he was becoming one of them. The town's Christmas tree tradition had a darker purpose than mere celebration. Each family's eternally living tree was actually feeding on them, slowly replacing their neural patterns with its own. The pleasant memories and feelings of nostalgia reported by residents were really symptoms of the tree's feeding process. They weren't preserving Christmas spirit, they were consuming it. My soil samples continued to evolve in their collection tubes, developing structures that became more complex by the hour. Under ultraviolet light, they revealed patterns matching ancient cave paintings found in the area. Drawings that showed tall, branching figures reaching down to touch human heads. The indigenous peoples had known what lived here, had tried to warn others through their art. The GPS's malfunctions finally made sense. The roads weren't moving, but the entire town was slowly being pulled toward a central point. Satellite imagery showed Evergreen Falls as the center of a massive spiral pattern formed by underground root systems. The town wasn't just a community, it was a carefully maintained farm where the trees cultivated human consciousness. Every Christmas decoration in town took on new meaning. As I understood more, the lights were really monitoring systems, the ornaments were neural interfaces, and the star shapes that topped every tree were actually complex organs that processed human thoughts into nutrients. The entire Christmas tradition had been hijacked by something that saw human joy as an energy source. My Arv's interior began showing signs of infection. Tiny rootlets emerged from the air vents, and the walls developed patterns that looked like growth rings. Through my cameras, I watched as the vehicle was slowly being converted into another growth medium for the entity that controlled the trees. Even my research equipment started sprouting tiny branches. The tree's true feeding cycle became clear as I reviewed my data. They didn't just maintain themselves through winter. They fed on human Christmas memories, drawing energy from generations of accumulated joy and tradition. Each family's endless Christmas celebration was really a continuous harvest. Drawing out the essence of their holiday experiences like sap from a tap, Mr. Green revealed the town's real purpose during what he called my final consultation. Evergreen Falls wasn't just a town, it was a nerve center for something that spread far beyond Oregon. The Christmas tree tradition had given it perfect cover to establish similar colonies worldwide, each one slowly converting human celebrants into nutrients for its endless growth. My botanical samples showed how the conversion process worked. The neural networks in the soil didn't just communicate, they gradually rewrote anything they touched, transforming organic matter into extensions of their own consciousness. The process was happening to every resident of Evergreen Falls, slowly replacing their thoughts with patterns that matched the ancient entity's own neural structure. The town's Christmas music took on new meaning when analyzed through my equipment. Hidden beneath the familiar carols were frequencies that matched the neural patterns in the soil samples. The songs weren't celebrating Christmas. They were programming instructions, slowly rewriting human brains to be more compatible with the entity's expanding network. As the transformation spread through my Arv, I watched through my cameras as earlier stages of the process played out across town. Families decorating their trees were really being decorated themselves, each ornament and light strand serving as an interface for the neural network's expansion. The entity hadn't invaded the town. It had grown it from the beginning. My test results revealed the full scope of the entity's plan. It wasn't content with just Evergreen Falls. The neural network was spreading through Christmas tree farms across the country. Each perfect, eternally fresh tree was a node in its expanding consciousness, using human holiday traditions as a delivery system for its infectious growth. The transformation of the townspeople reached its peak as Christmas approached. Through my microscope, I watched as their cellular structure became more plant-like, their neurons restructuring to match the patterns in the soil. They weren't dying, they were being repurposed, converted into new growth medium for the entity's endless expansion. Mr. Green's final form emerged as he explained my role in the process. His body had become a hybrid of human and tree, branches extending from his spine to connect him directly to the neural network. Every Christmas tree farmer in his family line had undergone the same transformation, becoming caretakers for the entity's growing consciousness. The Christmas tree lot had become a transformation center, each sale marking another family's integration into the network. The trees didn't just go home with their families, they brought their families home to the entity. Through my cameras, I watched as new customers were selected, their neural patterns tested for compatibility with the ever-growing network. My research equipment, now half consumed by spreading branches, revealed the entity's true nature. It had existed before Christmas, before winter celebrations, before humans had learned to mark the seasons. It had watched us develop our traditions and had slowly, patiently shaped them to serve its own growth. Every Christmas tree lot was now its nursery. The town's lights took on new patterns as night fell, matching the neural signals passing through the soil through my infected cameras. I watched as the entire community pulsed with shared consciousness. Evergreen Falls wasn't just growing trees. It was growing a new form of networked intelligence, using human celebration as both camouflage and catalyst. The escape from Evergreen Falls cost me most of my research equipment and part of my RV's interior. The vehicle's GPS still malfunctions near wooded areas, and sometimes the radio picks up frequencies that sound like Christmas carols mixed with neural programming signals through my surviving cameras. I can see how the infection tries to spread through any available growth medium. My soil samples continue to evolve in their sealed containers, showing how the entity adapts to new environments. The neural networks attempt to spread even in isolation, reaching out toward any source of Christmas celebration they can detect. I keep them as evidence, though sometimes I wake to find tiny branches trying to grow through the seals. The warning signs are clear now for those who know what to look for. Christmas tree lots that stay too perfect, trees that never drop their needles, holiday joy that feels more like programmed response than genuine emotion. The entity's network is spreading, using our own traditions as transmission vectors for its ancient consciousness. My remaining scientific equipment detects similar patterns across the country. Every Christmas tree farm is a potential colony. Every eternal tree a possible node in the entity's expanding network. The transformation process has begun in countless communities, spreading through the holiday season like a neural infection disguised as tradition. I leave warnings at RV parks and camping grounds now, trying to mark safe routes through areas where the network hasn't spread. The entity continues to grow, using each Christmas season to establish new connections through my cameras. I watch as more communities slowly transform, their holiday celebrations becoming more perfect, more eternal and more hungry. The footage from Evergreen Falls serves as both evidence and warning. The entity doesn't just grow Christmas trees. It grows new versions of consciousness, using human joy as fertilizer for its endless expansion. Each perfect Christmas celebration brings it closer to completion, converting human tradition into neural network one family at a time. If you're shopping for a Christmas tree and find one that seems too perfect,